Kia ora tātou. Good evening, everyone. No mai haere mai. Welcome to our meeting of the Cambridge Community Board this evening. I'm Charlotte Fitzpatrick and I'll be chairing the meeting, our hui this evening. And I'd like to start by opening our meeting with a karakia. Aha koa no whae tātou, aha koa o tātou ara huhua, ka hoi ngā tahi tātou I te waka kotahi, kia puawai ai ngā hua pai mō taone o te oko horoi. Ka mau mahara ki te hanga kua mate, mā tātou anō o whakarite I te huarahi, hei oranga mō ā tātou tamariki. Would someone like to do our English version?
Wherever we come from, whatever our backgrounds, we work together as one for great outcomes for Cambridge. We respect those who have gone before us and seek to enhance the future for our children.
Thanks, kia ora. Okay, so we'll open our meeting with apologies. It looks like we're all attending, so no apologies to record that instead. Disclosure of members' interests. No disclosures? No. Okay.
Very hard to hear.
We'll try and talk louder. Okay, so no disclosure of members' interests, so we'll move on to our public forum. So this part of our meeting is an important part of our meeting. The public forums are designed to enable members of the public to bring matters not necessarily on the meeting's agenda to the attention of our Cambridge Community Board. So for those of you watching online, and thank you if you are, requests to attend the public forum must be made to our governance team beforehand, at least one day before, if possible. Speakers can speak for up to 5 minutes, and at the conclusion of your presentation, some of the elected members might ask you some questions. So with that being said, we'll invite Kelvin up to the table, please. Kelvin's going to, I understand, talk about leaves. Okay, so when you're ready, Kelvin, just press the button and then we'll all be able to hear you, including those online. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I've been living in Cambridge for 9 years. I came 9 years ago only with the intention of staying a couple and then going back to Hamilton, but for various reasons, I ended up staying. I live on Browning Street, about 80 meters from the triangular reserve with Shakespeare Street. It's got 3 very big trees there. And in keeping with other streets which have got those same trees, there's a great deal of leaves get deposited. Council only, in theory, sweep that part of the reserve which abuts Shakespeare Street. I'm a couple of months off 75, and I spend about 8 to 9 hours a week on my hands and knees, picking up leaves from my driveway and my garden. All those leaves blow up from the triangular reserve into my place. So it's all the berms have to be cleaned, my driveway. And I used to have to pay to deposit all those in the dump myself at a cost of about $20 a week. I don't do that anymore. I deposit them on Shakespeare Street. The trouble is, the leaves don't get collected. It's been 2 weeks since I deposited the first lot and they still sit in there. I walk Leamington regularly. I stand and watch the leaf collectors and they need to be changed. They do not do the job properly. They miss areas frequently. For example, I was walking along Thompson Street up by the children's playground one day last week. There were 3 guys, 2 youngsters at the top, a more middle-aged man further down who was making a real hash of trying to blow them into the road. In the end, he changed his mind and just blew them all into the fence line of the adjoining field. And the 2 young chaps blew all the leaves on the children's playground. That part of Thompson Street isn't on the program for leaf picking, but it needs to be. If Shakespeare Street is swept, why can't the council merely, they are contractors, merely turn the corner and sweep all those leaves that are on that part of Browning Street, most of which get blown up by all the traffic and wind along Browning Street and predominantly end up in my garden, which doesn't have fences. It's just got plants abutting the road. When I see contractors not doing their job properly or failing to do it at all, I'm a ratepayer and I think I deserve to have the same level of service as other people who suffer similarly. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, when they, on the rare occasion, their gardening people come along, they just blow all their leaves back into the road. All that happens is, with the change in direction of the wind, the increased volume of heavy traffic which comes up and down past my house, it's just a constant. You can spend 2 hours picking up leaves, and by the time you finish, it's like you've never started, you know? So I would like the council, and I have made representations consistently about that issue over 9 years, and have been met with nothing but obfuscation and excuses. You know, we've got a 10.7% rates increase coming. That wipes out my superannuation increase, which is my only income. You know, I at 75 years, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be spending in this bad weather on my hands and knees fighting to pick up leaves. I take 82 40-litre bags every time down to Shakespeare Street and dump them there. And then the following day, I'm having to pick them up again and take them back. You know, it's not rocket science. If they did their jobs properly and perhaps revisit how they collect the leaves, for example, as we do in London, 20 years ago, they'd walk behind or ride on leaf vacuums. And they collected those leaves at the point where they fell on St. James's Park, Hyde Park, and so forth. And that would do away with a lot of that. Somebody needs, I brought a USB with some photographs of the problem and a video, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to have that connected to your system. So if it's possible, I'd like one or more of you to come up to Browning Street and see the problem at hand. And then you can see the sort of issues that we face at that part of Browning Street. They don't even sweep Browning Street up by Gwyneth Park where they've got trees there. So we get the worst of both worlds. With the wind changing direction, they just blow up and down all the time. The other issue I've got is the state of the footpaths and the gutters in Leamington. When I moved, just before moving here 9 years ago, I had a client who'd moved from Cambridge to Hamilton. And when I told her I was moving to Leamington, she said, "Oh, well, I wish you all the very best in the forgotten world." I had no idea what she meant. I know now, because we are forgotten. I used to use the Antenno app to report things like people parking on the footpaths, posts ripped out, road signs damaged. I stopped doing that middle of last year. Council just 9 times out of 10 never responded, never gave you a reference, and you didn't know what was going on, you know. And something needs to be done. Footpaths, I've been injured twice myself by tripping on damaged footpaths. And there are many. They're a hazard to health, particularly for the number of elderly people who are in that area. So something should be done about that. And I really urge, if the community board, all of you live up to the promises you made us during the election about advocating for the residents, a greater level of advocacy, I would urge you to do.
Thanks, Calvin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think a common issue people have. Some people love the leaves, some people hate them. So it's, but yes, I think have got your message about the level of service and the issue that can cause. Just for clarification, I would encourage you to definitely keep using Anteno to report those issues.
It's a waste of time. I reported the state of the gutters on the junction of Scott Street and Thompson Street in April of, well, for several occasions up to April of last year. And all those weeds are now dead because the guy on the corner sprayed them all, has not been touched. I had a friend who came for a short visit from the UK, got held up by the war with Iran, and spent an extra couple of months here. We spent a lot of time walking around Leamington. Bearing in mind she comes from Croydon in London. She actually commented how disappointed she was at the disgusting state of the streets in Leamington. And that comes from somebody who lives in London, which isn't the cleanest place. And she said she's gone back to the UK with an entirely different view of what Cambridge looks like, impressed with the CBD and that side of town, not so with Leamington.
Okay, yeah, definitely hear your concerns. Just had a little note that we'll follow up with the operational team about that contracted service. Would anyone else like to ask Kelvin any questions? Andrew?
Yeah, just thank you for coming along. I just thought your message was awesome, well thought out, loud and clear. You told it you come to the right place for representation and to voice your issues. So thank you. We heard that. I'm sure some of our members will be glad to come and meet you and look at your issue. So
yeah, that'd be really good, because it's not just about
we need more people like you coming to tell us your problems. Thank you.
I mean, there are a lot of people who say we got a lot of elderly in that, and young kids as well, who I've seen tripping over those footpaths. And when they're having to fight through the leaves as well, they don't know what's underfoot. They get the branches that are falling off the leaves, and again, the young kids coming home from school. And I know it's not particularly just to my side, but we are neglected. They don't do it. Those contractors really need to be looked at. And I've urged Brian Hudson on many occasions to have somebody to monitor their performance. And all I've got, again, is excuses and obfuscation and disrespect, about how hard the job is. We know that. Life's hard, When I was in business, I had said to my staff, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution, because the problem is not the problem. The problem is how you address it and resolve it,
Yeah,
And
sure.
I think that there's not a great deal of desire to solve issues like that. It's just easy to say, oh, well, it's a hard job. They've got the hard job to do, but they make it hard.
Yeah, sure. Do you have a question too?
If I could grab your telephone number tomorrow, I'm going over to Te Awamutu tomorrow with a council meeting, and I will, personally see what we can do
Yeah,
to
that'd
sort
be
of
fine.
certainly make
Thanks for that.
somebody
Yeah.
make
No,
contact,
I'm grateful.
and really somebody talking to you directly as to sort of
Yeah, I mean,
how we can
unless
resolve
people
it.
come out on the ground, they don't really appreciate what the situation is, But I'm grateful for the opportunity to be heard.
No, it's
For the
been really
empathy
good.
you've
Thank you.
expressed, which over the last 9 years, I've never had from council. So thank you very much. I appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much, Kelvin. Appreciate that. All right, so with that, we will move on to through our agenda. So we'd like to now confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. We have a recommendation that the Cambridge Community Board confirms the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of April 2026 is circulated with the agenda as true and a correct record of proceedings. Would anyone like to move? So Gerda and second Chris, thank you. All in favour say aye. Against, carried, thank you. And now I'd like to invite Councillor Dalmarie Morgan up to the table, please. We've got the deputation from Māori Ward Councillor. Before you get started, Dalmarie, apologies for the last meeting and that we didn't get to your report. So when you're ready, it's over to you.
Tēnā koe te tūru, tēnā koutou ngā mema o te puare o te okuhoroi. Tuatahi, I am pleasantly surprised to see karakia back around this table. I won't be afraid to say it. It's pretty clear in the report, and I've merged last month's and this month's together. And you will notice that within the gallery tonight, I did invite the hapori that karakia comes from. I was a little bit disappointed to know that you guys had removed the karakia from the process of this board. And it did feel like, as someone who sits in the Māori ward role, a wee bit like cancel culture. So to come in here and to see that karakia has been reinstated pleases my heart. I won't go through any of this because it's quite clear and it's detailed in here what I've got, but I'll say this at the end because I know you've got an agenda to keep to. There are a couple of points I need to put through this particular board in this space. I need to correct the record I heard from certain people and submitters recently over the last few weeks who have got the timing wrong around the Māori ward being disestablished. Just to be clear, decisions like this we all know must follow a legal process. We know that the process is set out in law. It includes the requirement for councils to engage with Māori. Those obligations exist because Te Tiriti o Waitangi established the framework that enabled governance in Aotearoa, including the settlement of non-Māori here. Having a Māori ward as part of that democratic framework, it's about ensuring representation and participation in decision-making consistent with those foundations. And when we see groups asserting a right to determine how the Indigenous people of this land are represented, it raises a serious concern because it suggests a gap between what some believe their role is and the responsibilities that come with public participation in upholding Te Tiriti relationships. So when that process isn't understood, it leads to misinformation. And we all have a responsibility to ensure our contributions are informed, accurate, and accountable. Ultimately, if we are serious about strong communities, we must come back to te kotahitanga. As the late King Tuheitia consistently called for, his daughter Te Ariki Nui Ngāwai Honui Te Pō continues and amplifies this, working together with mutual respect, not division, to move our communities forward. Meeting with King Charles recently, reinforcing that relationship built upon from when Queen Victoria actioned Te Tiriti o Waitangi to be written. I have rewritten He Manu Karere from last month and reiterate the appreciation to have a deputation each month. Next month I will zoom in from Ngāruawā Wāhia. But I will say this, it was disappointing to know that you had taken out the karakia and that had to be a subject that I had to raise here with you. Because as I've said, in my campaigning and many a time at the table, I want to be here to make magic and make sure that Waipa does have the best communities and it doesn't cancel the visualisation of communities that have been here for generations and over 30 generations. So I am really pleased that the board has reinstated karakia, and I'm even pleased to hear that the board also sent it to Te Ngira Siemens to cast his eye over to ensure that your karakia had the best intent that it could have been. So ka nui te mihi kia koutou nā mema o tēnei puari. I whakatika tō koutou tīmatatanga o koutou hui I tēnei pō, mō era hui, kaipatu. So, thank you all for reinstating that. I think that shows a genuine, authentic way in leadership and recognising the partners that you've always had here in this space. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora tātou, Murray. Thank you for that. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Andrew?
No, just thanks, Del Marie, for coming in and saying your feelings, and appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, and we really appreciate your supporters being here this evening as well. It's lovely to see you here. And this is a welcoming space, and we look forward to having your report next month as well.
Lastly, tēnā koutou I whakarongo mai I taku tono I a koutou I te tautoko I tēnei pō. Tēnā koutou.
Thanks, Del Marie. Okay, so we've got a recommendation here that the Cambridge Community Board receives the verbal presentation of Māori Ward Councillor Del Marie Morgan. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Yeah, Monty and Pitt. Thank you. All in favour say aye. Against carried. Thank you. And now we'll move on to an update on the activity at 3831 Cambridge Road. So this is just a follow-up with the community board after the April public meeting, on this topic, which was simulated from the chair's report and also the public forum. So we have Wendy here. Thank you for coming along, Wendy. And when you are ready, you can present your report to us.
Kia ora koutou. So this is just a very high-level update. We just to explain a couple of pieces of key work that we're doing before we come back in June with more comprehensive assessment with some of the, I feel like there was a couple of outstanding questions from the last session. So we will come back, but we just wanted to touch base to explain what we are doing so it didn't feel like silence. So two very key pieces of external work are being engaged. One particularly around the fire risk and the fire management of the demolition and construction waste plant, and that is looking at the with a fire management expertise from someone from the refuse side of things, so to ensure that the procedures in place as part of the consent are appropriate and are working with regards to any ongoing fire risk. The second is a consultant with a compliance speciality to look at the consented and compliance activities on site and provide guidance through to our enforcement team and through to our consents team about the consented activities and the compliance of those activities, and particularly in regards to the effectiveness of the conditions and whether what's called a Section 128 review of those conditions is a potential next step. So that's looking at effects either not being anticipated or not being managed successfully by those conditions. So that's a potential line. So that was all I had to share, but if anyone has any questions.
Okay, good.
There was a police presence and some investigation done this week. Can you expand on that?
I can touch briefly on that. So that was a search warrant undertaken by Waikato Regional Council, and that's all I know. And I'd maybe just touch one point, and that's just that the police presence is part of the Resource Management Act requirement, not an assumption of criminality.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification.
So effectively, you're still looking into it, nothing practical has been done about the situation?
Nothing practical being done other than getting engagement from 2 external consultants with expertise further in this area.
Like any progress from the ratepayer or the neighbours and the council? Because you're looking into it, you're going to do a report. You just from the ratepayer or from the neighbours who spoke here very emotionally, what do I tell them?
So I guess the report outlines that the expertise that we're obtaining and the reports that we're obtaining, that takes time to engage with those specialists. So we'll be having a full report back in June.
Thanks, Wendy. Any other questions, Pat?
I don't want to get real technical, but a section 128, just a little further explanation as to what that really involves.
So it's quite a so most consents, not most, a lot of consents where there's some unknowns, then it's not a standard activity, have a 128 condition, section 128 of the RMA, and that allows either specifics or very generalist options, depending on how it's worded, allows the consents team or council to undertake a review of those conditions to understand whether there's new effects or effects that weren't anticipated by the activity to essentially open them up to be managed through new conditions or amendments to the conditions, or to acknowledge that the conditions that were in place aren't successfully managing the effects, even if when they're being complied with. So it's quite rare to undertake. There's a few legal loopholes and things to jump through. So there's quite a high threshold to undertake it. And that's why we've obtained some expertise to help us in understanding whether that's the next step or not.
So what you're saying, if there is a section 128, in other words, you could potentially revisit the authorization that has been given or potentially revisit the consents that have been given?
It would allow us to revisit the consent conditions of the activity. So it's not a stop the activity, it was wrong to issue the consents, nothing like that. It's looking at the conditions and ensuring that those conditions successfully manage the effects of the activity. So whether it's the fire risk, for example, whether that was beyond what was anticipated and new conditions of consent would be required to successfully manage potential ongoing risk, or the traffic effects, what was in the, that's just a hypothetical, please, whether that was the management of that by the conditions doesn't cover the concerns. And so, because obviously, as Wayne pointed out at the last meeting, effects on properties outside of these activities shouldn't be at a level that of raising concern. So it would be enabling the conditions to manage those effects and reduce anything if there was there. So that's that process. So it's not a start from scratch revisit, if that makes sense.
And your expectation when you report next in the next month, that some of those issues around potential changes to a section 128 might in actual fact be presented or not?
So what we've asked for in return from this consultant is a memo providing guidance as to the next steps, and part of that may be, I haven't heard confirmation of what that's going to be in there. I'm meeting with her this week. If that was the next step of you need to do X, Y, Z, and then this should be okay, or X, Y, Z, and then you might have enough to do a 128 review. So I'm unsure. So it will be, I will share what we can share next month. It won't be that a 128 has been done. It's not a quick process.
Okay, a question from you, Chris?
One question that I would have, and I'm sure everybody else has, is that when push comes to shove and there's no compliance or there's nil compliance to the resource consent conditions, what's the end result if they just snub their nose to it all the way through?
So please keep in mind, I'm not the compliance or enforcement background or manager. So, but there are obviously the RMA has a number of stepped proceedings regarding compliance, but I can defer that and write that down for Carl when he returns with me next month.
All right, just last question.
Can you give us an update on the stage 2 or the next level, whether, because there was a question, will it be open for public consultation? Has a decision been made on that?
A decision hasn't been made yet, but is very close to being made.
Okay, thanks so much, Wendy. So we have a recommendation that the Cambridge Community Board receives a report of Wendy Robinson, Manager, District Plan and Growth, titled Update on Activity at 3831 Cambridge Road. I'm happy to move. Could I have a seconder? Pip, thank you. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. And now we'll move on to our long-term plan project update, which Kirsty is going to provide to us this evening, which will just give the Cambridge Community Board members an update on the project timeline and what's been happening since our last meeting. Thanks, Kirsty.
Kia ora tato. So I would like to provide apologies from Melissa Russo, our Manager Strategy, who is currently on leave, and present the report in her absence. I'd like to take the report as read and then just highlight some key points. So since your previous meeting, the Council has considered and approved some new strategic goals and priorities. Those strategic goals are medium term, so 3 to 10 years, and the priorities being short term, 0 to 3 years. Those will collectively underpin the development of the 27-37 long-term plan and all of the component parts of that, including key strategies and policies. In your report, there is reference to a workshop that was held last week on growth and significant forecasting assumptions. That is a piece of work, I guess a program of work that has been prioritised following the adoption of the 25-34 long-term plan last year, and is a really proactive and comprehensive program of work that is underway across the organisation, ensuring that we are coordinating our planning, infrastructure development and service delivery. So Katie Mays, who is here with us to talk about Cambridge Connections, is leading that program of work. And as part of that workshop last week, there were draft growth principles that were workshopped with the elected members. And that is something that too will then feed into the long-term plan and the review of Waipa 2050 growth strategy. Within the report also there is reference to further long-term plan workshops being held this week on the 21st of May and next week on the 27th of May relating to levels of service. We have acknowledged that they need to be informed by some context setting around our financial strategy, revenue and financing policy. So that level of service workshop has been deferred and will now be held on the 2nd of June. Just check, 4th of June, sorry, apologies. And next week there will be a workshop which is further considering the financial strategy, revenue and financing policy, and also an introduction to the development of Council's infrastructure strategy, a 30-year strategy that forms part of the long-term plan. So these are foundational pieces in the development of the long-term plan. and levels of service will follow, whereby elected members will provide staff with guidance as to what, if any, services need to be reviewed. And if there are services that are going to be reviewed, then we will be looking to undertake early engagement with the community later this calendar year. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
And Kirsty, I have one to start off with. It's possibly something that you've thought about, but the community may also be interested in what happens to this long-term plan work in the next 3 months following the national government's announcement around amalgamation. Has any consideration been made around that?
So certainly that's something that we're turning our minds to. And as no decisions have been made by our elected members in relation to the way forward following the government's announcement. So that is still being discussed, considered and worked through. We have a very tight time frame to be able to deliver the 27-37 long-term plan. Ordinarily, that would be developed over a 3-year time frame. We're working to 2 years. So we have some key milestones that we are required to further progress. So that work continues, but with an eye to the future. And looking at, I guess, where we invest resources and where potentially significant review and or change might be undertaken, with an eye to the future.
Thanks for that.
Just acknowledging that, Charlotte, as the chair of the community board, that you have been invited to obviously attend and participate in workshops as part of the development of the long-term plan. And I know that you've sought some feedback from staff about the role of the community board, information to be shared with the board collectively, providing greater guidance to you in terms of what we seek from you. And I guess what is of value to the board. So we will be coming back to you on that.
Yeah, that's great. Because obviously, attendance at those meetings and try to do my absolute best to be there. Want to ensure that we're providing value in the best possible way. So, any other questions to Kirsty? Andrew?
Thank you, Kirsty, for the report. Look, I really like the intent of how these are written, the priorities and the strategies. So well done on that. Just for the public that are listening that might not have this report in front of them, one of the strategic goals reads: ensure prudent and sustainable financial management to deliver value. And one of the priorities is lean organisation, deliver service in line with community affordability. And we just had a gentleman here tonight who mentioned that, all the super gains are wiped out by the 10.7% rates increase. So I think that's right on the money at the moment. My question is, how will you report on actual progress versus these measures? And you touched on this already. What's an appropriate way the public and the community board can help hold the council to account on these measures?
So can I just maybe respond, because you've made reference to the average 10.7% rates increase, which is part of the development of the annual plan, so separate to this long-term plan process. And that process hasn't yet concluded. So elected members have had a public workshop recently where they provided direction to staff, but no decisions have been made. So in respect of the 26-27 annual plan, that will be presented to council for consideration at its meeting on the 24th of June. And we will be looking to have a workshop session with community boards on the annual plan specifically. With regard to reporting, Andrew, can I please just ask you to clarify what specifically?
So you've put out these goals and priorities, and it's good to talk about what you think you're going to do, but we want to see how the council delivers on these goals and priorities.
Yeah, so thank you. So the goals and priorities will underpin not only the development of the long-term plan and the component parts of that, but they will be driven through all of the work that we undertake across the organisation. So with respect to the long-term plan specifically, we will have a performance measurement and monitoring framework that will be developed as part of the long-term plan, and there will be reporting through that. But similarly, we have in place monitoring and reporting processes through our various committees of council, our Risk and Assurance Committee, our Finance and Corporate Committees. So these strategic goals and priorities will help to inform our reporting through those standard processes.
Thanks, Kirsty. Any other questions for Kirsty? Okay, so we've got a recommendation that the Cambridge Community Board receives the report of Daisy Wills, Strategic Policy Advisor, titled 2027-37 Long-Term Plan Project Update. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Pip and Chris, thank you. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. And now we're going to move to our Waikato Water Limited update. So this report was to provide the Cambridge Community Board with an update on what's happening in the waters transition ahead of the planned changeover, which is actually only just around the corner on the 1st of July. So yeah, we have Kevin Scott here. Welcome. And when you're ready, you can present your report, Kevin.
Good evening, everyone. Yep, I'm Kevin Scott. I'm the Transition Director for Waters. I lead the small team that's charged with the responsibility for developing a plan for the transition of our water services, staff, equipment, assets, including property, revenue and debt to Waikato Waters. I just checked my we've been saying all week that we're 32 working days from go live. I just checked my phone before I stepped up here and it's 27. So yeah, it is just around the corner, and it's very near. So where are we at? Well, the good news is we're in good shape to transition. All the planning has been done. All the major decisions that council needs to take have been taken, and the few outstanding issues that needed to be cleared up before we can transfer everything across on the 1st of July are very close to being resolved. The whole thing is governed by a transfer agreement agreed between council and Waikato Waters that sets both the frameworks for how things are to be transferred, also schedule of exactly what is to move across. That was agreed back at the end of March. And now at the end of this month, we go back to council with a variation to that agreement to sweep up all the odds and ends that hadn't been finalised in March. And there's basically nothing left outstanding. There's just a few very minor wrinkles. We're moving 50 staff across. So all of our staff who work directly on waters, more than 80% of their job is to do with waters, are transferring to Waikato Waters. There's just one outstanding staff member that we've got to do the last little final bits of their agreement. And about 3 other staff who work partially on waters have also accepted a job at Waikato Waters. We've agreed with Waikato Waters the amount of debt that we are to transfer across to them. Don't ask me what it is off the top of my head, but it's a fair estimation of the debt that we are to move across to them. And we've agreed all the other stuff that is to move, vehicles, everything like that. So we're very close to being ready to go, and I welcome your questions.
I'll just start on page 3 of your report. There was a table with the different work streams and the current status.
Yep.
Could you just chat to us about technology, mana whenua, iwi partnerships and governance and legal, which are currently amber, and what that looks like?
Yes, and I think in our latest weekly report that we presented to the project governance group today, 2 of those are now green. Governance and legal was to do with, there was a few outstanding pieces of the transfer agreement to be finalised. There were a couple of properties that we didn't quite have agreement on. One of them was half of the Cambridge wastewater treatment plant. As you're well aware that as the new plant is being built, and when it is complete, the current ponds area becomes not required for water services. Just because of the way the legislation is written, because that separation hasn't happened yet, the whole plant, including the ponds, has to transfer to Waikato Waters. So we were just working through with them the arrangements for that ponds half of the land to come back to us after the plant is opened, which is actually fairly soon after transfer. There was another minor one with the water bridge across the river. We've landed that as well. And then the last remaining area in that was just the arrangements for us to bill on Waikato Waters' behalf over the next 12 months until the billing system in place. And we hadn't quite landed that either. Those are all sorted, so that one's green. I'll come back to the post-completion services agreement at the end of this answer. Technology stays amber until we're confident that all the systems are up and in place. And in fact, that the one that we were most worried about is payroll. We wanted absolute certainty that all our staff will be able to be paid at the first pay run in July. And they are physically stress testing the system with data that we've transferred to them on Thursday, I understand. And that's when we'll know if their payroll system functions as you'd expect it to, with an acceptable error rate. The third bit was iwi mana whenua. The development of the iwi mana whenua relationship by Waikato Waters hasn't gone as fast as we had anticipated and hoped. Mostly, I think, because they are waiting for the partnership agreement between the Shareholders Representative Forum, which is the grouping of mayors that represents the owning councils. It is developing a partnership agreement with mana whenua for how mana whenua will engage with that group, and then how that relationship then cascades through the organisation. So in our original planning, we thought that would have happened faster. It hasn't, but it's not fatal to the transfer. So it's not red, it's something that's not complete yet. That's the 3 of them. As part of the transfer agreement, there is 2 subsidiary agreements, a post-completion services agreement and a shared services agreement. The post-completion services agreement lays out those services that we will provide to Waikato Waters on an interim basis whilst they get fully stood up. Do you remember there's 3 more councils to come on board over the next 12 months, and they've got to get their billing system developed and operational. So for the next 12 months, we will continue to rate for water and then pass that revenue through to Waikato Waters. Similarly, they don't have the development contribution system developed yet, and we will continue to collect development contributions. And there was, customer services. They don't have their customer services system set up yet, so we will take the queries from from consumers, from our ratepayers, and pass them through to Waikato Waters. So that they've got work to do yet to fully stand up their systems. But that's a time-limited set of arrangements. There's also another agreement for services that we will provide to each other potentially on an ongoing basis. And for each of these agreements, there's a series of service orders that will be developed for things that we provide them. And probably the best example would be if, as part of our lawn mowing contract, our whole of council lawn mowing contract, we mow the lawns around the plants. Maybe instead of getting their own contract, they'd like us to continue to do that on their behalf, and we have an agreement for how that's managed. Now, that's a hypothetical example. In the shared services agreement at the moment, we have the framework of the agreement, but there's no associated service orders agreed yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions, Pip?
Given I'm very conscious that we've got a number of people potentially online who are also watching this. And so just from a real practical standpoint,
What's going to change?
Like, on the 1st of July or sort of, somewhere when we get our quarterly invoice, who does what and when and how, and, just explain in practical terms what's going to happen, let's say in the first quarter and the second quarter of this coming year, post 1st of July.
Yep.
What do the consumers of Waipa District, how things are going to be different?
Yeah, on day one, all
the same.
Yeah, so on the 1st of July, all that people will see that's different is the Waikato Waters staff will be wearing Waikato Waters uniforms. Their vehicles will be branded Waikato Waters. But it's all the same people who have been delivering your water services now that you see in crews on the roadside. But they'll be very clearly part of a new organisation. From a consumer's perspective, the water will still flow and their wastewater will still flow away from the house, hopefully. If something does go wrong, you will continue to call the council for the next 12 months. And we will manage moving that service request to Waikato Waters. Similarly, you will still get your water bill from council. It will probably be on a separate piece of paper that's branded Waikato Waters. Maybe. That's the fine details that are still being worked out. But it's essentially you'll continue to pay the water rates that you are currently paid, and we will pass the revenue over to Waikato Waters. In 12 months' time, on the 1st of July 2027, you will receive a separate water bill directly from Waikato Waters, and you will pay the water charges to Waikato Waters. And similarly, they will have a call centre established, and something like the Fixit app that we have now in place, and all your service requests will go to Waikato Waters. So
it's lots of paperwork eventually. a bill
look,
for...
Yeah, and there's, over the next 12 months, people will see a request come from Waikato Waters for them to establish a direct debit if they want for their water charges and that sort of thing, but it won't happen immediately.
Any follow-up questions, anyone? Good.
Yeah, just what legal protections, so I haven't read into all the legal things, what legal protections are there to prevent privatization or selling off for assets?
Oh, crazy strong, if I can be blunt about it. There is an explicit it is expressly prohibited in the law, in the Water Services Act, for anyone other than a council to be a shareholder of one of these water entities. It's absolutely black and white. They cannot be sold, and also the water services entity can't enter into any form of equity sharing agreement with anybody else. The only entity that can be an owner is a council. It was front and centre of the reforms as government considered them.
Right. Anyone else would like to answer the question? Okay, perfect. So we've got a recommendation that the Cambridge Community Board receives the report of Georgina Knapp, Acting Manager, Group Manager, Business Support, titled Waikato Waters Limited Update. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Pip and Gerda, all in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thanks so much, Kevin. Really appreciate that. And now we'll move on to our latest Cambridge Connections update. So I've got Katie here. So this is a project update, but we do have our workshop later on as well. So deep dive into all things Cambridge Connections.
Tēnā koutou. I'd just like to firstly, Mihi Te Poto Davies has just stepped out from Ngāti Koraki Kahukura, who sits on our community reference group. And with me tonight is Peter Carr, who's one of the co-chairs of the community reference group. And thought it would be really useful for you to be able to ask questions directly, particularly in the workshop setting, I think, because because the report that we provided really just gives you an update of the activity that's been going on since last month and when I presented. So take the report as read, but just remind people kind of where we're at with the process. So at the moment, what we're doing is taking the community ideas, supplemented by the technical ideas, and starting to look at them. I guess at the moment, we're trying to eat an elephant one bite at a time through this next little while, looking at the potential bridge options, and you'll see a map there that translates the community ideas into broad areas of potential bridge locations, looking at parking management, looking at public transport, particularly then which is managed by Waikato Regional Council, and then walking, cycling and micro-mobility, to then be able to put that back together, to think about that from a system perspective, and take forward some of those ideas on the 3rd of June to the Strategic Planning and Policy Committee. To be able to get direction from the elected members about how we might start to then channel that further investigation to really start to get into the detail over the next little while. So over this period of time, we've had 2 workshops with elected members. We've had 3 meetings with the community reference group, with a 4th and final one tomorrow evening. And then obviously the workshop with you this evening to be able to then synthesise that into the information to be able to present alongside the technical evidence that you're starting to see come through to support the workshop, to be able to put to our elected members on the 3rd of June. So just perhaps park there, and happy to answer any questions that people have about the report. Otherwise, we'll look forward to the workshop shortly.
Thanks, Katie and Peter. Any questions on the report? It's a very good report, thank you. No questions. Just excited for the workshop. So we have a recommendation that the Cambridge Community Board receives the report of Katie Mays, Executive Director, titled Cambridge Connections Update. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Yeah, Chris and Pip, all in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. And that takes us to the chairperson's report, which I will take as read and am happy to answer any questions. Okay, let's go to our recommendation. Everyone's happy. The Cambridge Community Board receives the report of Charlotte Fitzpatrick, Chairperson, Cambridge Community Board, titled Chairperson's Report, May 2026. Could I have a mover? Chris, and seconder? Gerda, thank you. All in favour, say aye. Against, carried. And our last item on our formal agenda is the Treasury report. This is a pretty straightforward one. We have a recommendation. Okay, so the Cambridge Community Board receives the report of Nada Milne, Financial Accountant, titled Treasury Report. You see you're going to move that, Gerda? And seconder? Oh, Monty, thank you. All in favour, say aye. Against? Carried. Okay, and then lastly, the date of the next meeting. No, yeah, will be on the 16th of June. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. This is, yeah, we need to do our board members' reports. So I'm happy to start. Just in addition to the chairperson's report last week, I had a quarterly, just informal update with Mayor Mike. So we're just trying to just ensure that we've got good communication going across the community. I showed him, just talked through our high-level strategy, which we'll take to strategic planning and policy, and start reporting against that. And yeah, seem to be happy. So yeah, happy to move this way. Gerda, would you like to go next?
So I had a sorry. I had a follow-up meeting with the people who spoke on demo works, and he just walked out, unfortunately. So Mr. Lynch from the Regional Council has been proactive and has been talking to the directly affected people. And then investigation were carried out, as we know. I also met regarding the Aspen Road quarry with Carl Tutty and Marie Blakey, Mr. Martin, etc. for Aspen Road, where the main thing came out of that, that if they can monitor trucks in and out, a lot of the problem will be solved. I made some suggestions and will investigate as far as the security companies go, if they can do that, where council can monitor on their phone instead of going out. Very simple solution, just a cost thing. And then advertising was done for neighbourhood support, so that is going to local, what's it called? Cambridge Local. And what else? Oh, and I spent the day at Karapiro Lake talking to a lot of people on wants, needs, what they're thinking. You know, a lot of things of trust and council things, just general catching up with neighbours, with great players. That's me.
Yeah, you're busy. Chris?
Okay, attended the Anzac Day commemorations and celebration, being the chairman of the organising committee, so that apparently went very well. And then on the 12th of May, I attended the community board funding distribution meeting. And then on the 14th of May, attended the Anzac Day organising group event debrief. And we went through the items that we needed to talk about. And the upshot was that it seems to have been a pretty successful day, and we're hoping that that will carry on.
Excellent, thanks. Stuart?
I'm out in the community all the time, and I'm getting the same thing, and they keep, all my constituents say, when are you going to fix the congestion? When are you going to get rid of the speed humps? I said, we're working on it. I've looked at a couple other things I've had complaints about. One is the PM's playground, and it's got steps down there where old people can't go down if their grandkids go down in there. So I'm looking at that. I've taken a couple of photos, and also around the trotting track around there at night time on a foggy day or rainy day, visibility is very bad because there's street lighting there, and it's just enough lighting to make your car lights not work. But yeah, it needs white lines around the outside and that, so you know where you are. You just can't see there. And I'm looking into our water tower to see what's going to happen there in the future. That's for me. But
Yep, thanks, Stuart. Andrew?
The main things for me have been the Cambridge Connections Community Reference Group meetings. There's been 2 held in the last 2 weeks for an hour and a half on Wednesday nights. There's another one tomorrow night, and we'll talk about it further in the workshop this evening. So we've all been briefed through the papers provided about that. The other main thing is a proposed rural tour. The Cambridge Community Board hosts the rural tour in the winter, where we facilitate ratepayers to be able to get in front of key council elected members or staff. The last few years, we've toured the rural halls or had meetings in public facilities in the rural area. And last year particularly was well attended, mainly because there was quite a heated, hotly contested election race for mayor. So we've put our feelers out to invite Mike Pettit along, and that would be proposed to be held later in June or right at the start of July. And after our formal meeting tonight, we can workshop around the dates of those meetings. But I just want to let everyone know about that. Thank you.
Right, thanks. And Pip?
Yeah, my activity's all been sort of very much. Mike and I've spent seemingly days in the council chambers, sort of building up to this long-term plan. So lots of activity, lots of dare I say very detailed meetings, but not as much in the community. But I am getting a feeling that we are starting to make some tractions.
Good. And Monty?
Yeah, you're actually reasonably well up to date because you've had a Cambridge Connections update right now, and there's a workshop coming. You've had the long-term plan update, and a little bit was mentioned about the annual plan, and there's this briefing or meeting coming up. You actually named a date for that, I think, didn't you, Chrissy? 4th or something? Just 2nd of June. So there's heaps going on at council at the moment. The big 3, of course, being annual plan, long-term plan, and Cambridge Connections. Also, so you're relatively up to date, and you will be soon on the annual plan. That's probably the one that you know the least about. The Karapiro Reserve Management Plan, we had the hearings last week. And so the next step for that is a deliberations meeting of SPMP. And that's, have you named a date or not?
Yes, we have. That's going to be held on the 29th of June.
29th of June, hot off the press, I believe, that date.
26th of June, sorry.
26th of June,
Yep.
okay. So that's been a reasonably big piece of work too, which is quite sort of central to Cambridge Community Board, given it's right on our doorstep. So yeah, heaps going on. You're relatively up to date. Charlotte, it's really great to have you along to the long-term plan workshops. It's really important, and anyone else who wants to come to those workshops, if you want to really understand what happens in council, the long-term plan workshops are where it's all at. Okay, they're the building blocks of our major planning instrument, really. Well, I shouldn't say planning instrument, of how we do things for the long term. It is all in the long-term plan. So anyone who wants to come along, they're thrilling watches, aren't they, Charlotte?
No, it is actually really interesting. The growth one was very good, and it was actually really good to get an understanding too of where the capacity is actually at and where we're sitting with growth. So yeah, some good material was circulated around there, and we received a media release after that as well, which is good. So yeah, well worth it. The ones around level of service will be a bit more juicy, I think.
They're all juicy. Right. Happy to take any questions.
And that's good. Kirsty, do you want to contribute anything or add anything in? Okay, quite happy. All right, as long as you're happy. Okay, so now we can move to the date of our next meeting, which is Tuesday, the 16th of June. That's the week after field days. So that'll be quite fun. And then we will close our meeting with our karakia. Ka tū ngā tahi tātou mō te hapuri o te okohoroi, no tātou te honore kia noho mai ki tēnei takiwā, kia rangatia te tū, kia haumaru te noho, kia atawhai te nākau. Do the English again.
Together we stand for the Cambridge community. We give thanks for the honour to be part of it. Be honourable, be safe, be kind.
Thanks, everyone. So we'll just adjourn before we get into our workshop for 5 minutes. And then we'll come back for our Cambridge Connections workshop. All right, so shall we get started with our workshop? They're all
Yep.
yours, Katie.
Thank you very much.
Peter?
Good evening, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you, and if I can help you in any way this evening, conscious, by the way, that Andrew is your representative on the Cambridge Connections Group, and I'm not here to cut across anything Andrew wants to describe, but if I can be helpful, I promise you I will be.
So the way that I've set out the paper, I think, is probably a useful way to run through and get feedback from you about sort of different components that we've talked about here. So I've broken this paper up, and then we've obviously got a series of appendices to be able to rely on, so that the feedback that you're given is supported by by evidence all the way through, and that's going to be something that obviously remains really critical for us along the way. So if you're happy, what we'll do is just jump straight in and deal with it in the order that things are in the paper. And seek feedback. And each section will just probably be slightly different about the way that I suggest is sort of the most effective way to gather your feedback. But if there are, before we sort of jump into that, we'll talk about network then parking, then walking, cycling, and then public transport. I thought just before we do that, it's a good opportunity perhaps to both hear from you about anything beyond that you would like to raise, to make sure that we cover it off in the workshop. And if you've got questions specifically of Peter and Andrew, obviously wearing a community reference group hat about the process overall or anything else, then perhaps we could start with that before we get into the specifics.
Okay, so questions?
So any questions for the community reference group or in general about the project before we dive into the specifics? All right, let's dive in and then we can round out, make sure that we've covered everything off by the end. So firstly, network options. What we've done particularly to start this work is remembering that a bridge location is a key component of this project, but a bridge obviously sits within a network of roads around the district. So what we've done first is translate the community ideas about potential bridge locations into these broad areas, and you'll see them, we've kind of labelled them as Far West, Midwest, et cetera, and so what we'd like to be able to do is understand from you what you think the pros and cons are of each of those options. And one of the questions that the elected members on the 3rd of June will consider is there sufficient technical evidence, and what's the feeling of the community represented by yourselves, community reference group, their own networks, about whether there is sufficient evidence to not progress with any of those options as we start to get into further investigation, as it shows in the paper there, we still start to get to that funnel. The reason for asking that question for the elected members to consider on the 3rd of June is that by the time we get to the beginning of October, when we have a draft transport plan that will go out for public consultation, in that draft transport plan, it's expected that there will be one bridge corridor in that plan. So we've got 4 months to get from about here to October. So making sure that we've got that the evidence base, and that we're then testing that with the community as we go through the next 4 months, will be really critical. So I think the way that this worked well when we've done it with the elected members and the community reference group was actually to go around the table and talk about one option first, then go back around the table and talk about the next one, and have an opportunity for each of you to be able to identify particular pros and cons. And if you've got a particular view about whether something has that sort of strength to be taken further or not. So perhaps Charlotte, do you want to chair this? Do you want me to do it? How would you like to?
No, I'm quite happy for you to lead us. That's absolutely fine. Considering this is a workshop. Yep.
Step in,
and then you're just
step
going
in
to
if
get
that's
what
not-
you need from
Yep.
us from the
Yeah,
meeting.
okay. That's great. So how about we start the order that you've got in the paper starts with the additional bridge on the east with a ring road in the south of Leamington, and obviously we've got the map in that material as well. And so perhaps we can just start on one side of the table, Stuart, and start on one side, head around, have pros and cons, and then back again for the next option, and keep going through that way of looking at it. Yeah, so pros and cons of the East Bridge.
So which actual plan you want me to talk about? I mean, I haven't actually.
Got the big maps, have they got the big
Yeah,
maps?
let me get a big map for you to see. If you
Just to help you, at our meeting last Wednesday, we had some huge, whatever that is, maps with basically 4 colored areas in them. So we were talking to the areas and not specific lines through those areas. I can make that really, really key. It was a wee bit generic, but sufficiently detailed for people to understand where we were playing. So, and from the way you're looking at them, they start east, central, I'm moving west all the time, east, central, midwest, and far west. They've each got a separate color on the map.
Would it help if maybe I start? Sorry, we're going to.
I just thought maybe I'll throw a few ideas out there to get the ball rolling, and then don't kind of copy me, but just some ideas. So we're talking about the Eastern Bridge, and I just raised I couldn't really fathom a bridge going out there that would meet the needs of what Cambridge wants. So I stepped ahead and said we should get rid of that option, but I referred back to the problem statements that we've got to reduce through and across town traffic and heavy vehicles as well as heavy vehicles. And I just thought that Eastern Bridge, I just couldn't see it doing that. So that was my big negative for having a bridge out there. And in your mind, you've probably already got could be more west or centre. It'll flow freer when we talk about those options. The east one is a bit of a sticky one to talk about, I felt. So don't be concerned if you haven't got a lot of ideas about that particular one. But I'm sorry. The eastern one is quite a hard one to deal with. Yeah, so don't be concerned if you didn't have too many prior thoughts about that idea. But the council, Katie already suggested, they're looking. The next step is to be able to perhaps rule one out, or to have some ideas and clear evidence that the community don't value it as one of the preferred options. So you can think of it like that as well.
Yeah, to me, the eastern option, the big advantage of the eastern option to me is the heavy transport option. We've heard a lot of people talking about Pope Terrace, etc. This does appear to provide a solution by which the heavy traffic can bypass and will head out east, and so therefore will avoid some of that heavy traffic. But I think that to me is the big advantage if we're looking at positives. Obviously, the disadvantages are going to be it probably doesn't handle the solve many other issues, but to me, the big advantage is that it does look after that heavy transport option.
Right, look, I get a bit of a triple dip at this, so I'll keep my comments brief, okay? And what I would say is Andrew's already talked about the problem statements. So anything that we're thinking about for Cambridge Connections, and particularly the network options, always have in mind what we're trying to solve, because what you're trying to solve determines whether your solution is good or bad. Yeah, on that, the Eastern Corridor doesn't seem to solve a whole lot of the problems that we're trying to address. It's a bit of an outlier, worthy of some consideration, but I can't see it solving many of our problems.
Yeah, I just tend to agree too. Looking at the TomTom data, it doesn't look like the east option would actually solve the problem of peak work and school traffic times, which is where most of our congestion comes from. So I would rule that option out in terms of investment.
Same with the east, it doesn't solve any problems. Still have the same problem that we have now.
The east route is not workable. It doesn't solve all the problems, and other options are much more effective.
That's gonna you could a total new roadway. It's going to go through a lot of people's properties. It's going to cost millions to buy the access to it, and it's a long way to go, and a lot of people won't use it unless they're already somewhere around that area. That, yeah, it's a net no for me.
Thank you. That's really useful feedback. If we move actually the next on your list actually then jumps us through to the far west. So the blue on the left-hand side, obviously, or the far west bridge. It would be a new bridge. So I'll just read from it says a new bridge west in the vicinity of St. Peter's School, the new road connection into Cambridge Road, Kaipaki Road area. So perhaps we can go around in the same way and start with Andrew.
The town is growing very quickly out on the western side. So I feel that the far west, in general, the western side of town is a suitable place to add another connection. There's the far west option is green space, green field, so it's easier to plan and get the property to do a bridge and create the ideal connections ahead of time. The negative is that I feel it's way outside of the town boundary and therefore doesn't help to solve the problem statements as well as some of the closer options. And as a rural representative, I don't like the concept that this bridge would promote far greater urbanisation of good rural land, good productive rural land, being further out for town in bigger blocks of rural land. Thank you.
My dear, I do have a couple of cracks at the side, just sort of, I think the far west option does provide the whole concept of a ring road. The question is the ring road too far out, too big a ring and not solve what I call the intra-Cambridge traffic issues? So, but it does have I think the big advantage of operating in green space. And so in other words, you are probably dealing with a smaller number of property owners and probably construction a lot more less constrained with a fewer number of property owners and more green space that you're dealing with, albeit the issue that Andrew raises.
Yeah, for me, the far western corridor is it's not ideal for the similar reasons to the eastern one. It's too far out of town to cater for people moving around our town. It works well for people trying to drive around our town, but if you look at the data or the journey data of where people are starting and finishing, a majority of trips are within Cambridge and Leamington. So taking people sort of way out of town to cross the river to come back doesn't really make sense. It doesn't solve enough of our problems, because if we'd written our problem statement to get people to bypass around our town, it would make sense, but that isn't key to our problem statements.
Yeah, for this one, I think it assumes that most of the traffic currently going over a bridge, that the problem trying to be solved is to reduce congestion for those going to Hamilton. Sorry, I probably haven't articulated that quite right. But I don't think that's necessarily right. If you look at, remember, Whanganui built a bridge, a new bridge, and the purpose was to try and solve a congestion problem, but actually it didn't, because people still wanted to use the main thoroughfare to go through to town, because that's the main purpose and the activity that that they were doing. So I think we could draw on that as an example. I think from our own learnings here that this option could potentially also move congestion, which has been a repeated issue in Cambridge, where we've put in like new transportation options and it's actually just moved congestion. This one could potentially drive more congestion down Hamilton Road, coming into town. Yeah, I think the other risk is that it could also encourage more development outside of our traditional town belt area. I'm not really a fan of this option. I think it has some benefits, but as Andrew said, it's a less populated area. But I don't think essentially it would be solving the key problem.
Basically the same, less property owners affected, but will not solve a problem. It's only the problem if you, or solve a problem if you want to miss town, but that's not what the problem is at the moment.
I'm not in favour of this option at all, and the fact that it's too far out of town. We're not going to get the utilisation of the bridge. We're trying to move traffic away from the two bridges that we have at the moment to ease the congestion on that, and to also move heavy transport away from the congested residential streets. I'm not in favour of this one at all. It won't work.
It's a no-go for me either. As Ezra said, it's too far out and it won't really solve much of the problem.
All right, we'll come back around. The next one around is the Midwest option, making sure I'm looking at the right one here. So that's the grey in the picture that you've got there, and this would be a new bridge in that area.
Would you like a break?
Midwest, I believe, is suits you know, it's a combination of two good options, but maybe not the best. So we get a good compromise on freight, being able to stay out of town, and then we get it close-ish to the centre of town to enable some pull of traffic and reduce congestion in town. So it does a bit to appease two things, but I don't think it provides the ultimate solution. It does link in with a ring road, which was suggested also with the far west and the east. It can definitely connect in there. We're getting into a zone where I think most people will feel like a bridge could go. My opinion is that it's still slightly too west. If we think about the congestion in Cambridge, when it is and where it is, I have trouble seeing it being too far to the west. So I think we've got to keep. I just think it's far west. Oh, sorry, Midwest is still for me too far west to really ease problem statement number one, is reducing, you know, congestion in town.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the Midwest option is a very viable one. You can see there's not a lot of physical streets. You know, it's going to be relatively new land. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, relative to going into town where you're sort of going to be, you know, working with a lot of people, and we found out last time that sort of, you know, people were talking about the cultural heritage of sort of, you know, taking existing, you know, arterial routes into and out of, you know, existing sort of heavily residential streets. So we're starting to sort of get down to a smaller number of options here, and Midwest to me has got a lot of viable advantages, particularly with regard to transport, and it is a bit of a compromise, but I think it does provide and it solves some of many of the problem statements that we talked about.
Okay, yeah, Midwest definitely candidate worthy of further investigation. It's beginning to solve the problems that we're trying to solve. You can easily imagine a river crossing in there somewhere, fitting into the sort of network options we're looking for, both to move people around inside our town, to move freight, cater for public transport, those kind of things. So, yep. I think it's definitely worthy of detailed modelling to see what it would do. Just to Andrew's point about how far west is too west, it'll be really interesting to see what the traffic modelling does to the existing river crossings as it tracks further west. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think this one has a number of benefits. One concern that we've heard as a community board is the heavy traffic movements, and that in this option, I think, would relieve some of that pressure rather than divert heavy traffic through town, which is the other option. There's less dwellings around here. It solves a problem that we often get from the community around put the bridge anywhere but not by my house. You know, that's a very real issue that we're going to be facing. And that's essentially why we're sitting here talking about this in the first place, following the other one. Yeah, the other thing is it lines up with our growth sales quite well. We're going to have heavy development in future years out on Kaipaki Road, at the back of, what is that, Kotari Park, Cambridge, like the back of Cambridge Park, Lamb Street area. This provides accessibility for those residents. But I am still quite concerned with this option that, again, we are just moving some level of congestion. So for those that are wanting to drive into town, which we want them to do for the economic viability of our town, there would need to be some really good connection to support people who, you know, who want to basically shop and do the things that they like to do in our beautiful town. Mic drop.
this is definitely my preferred option. Not too many houses involved, so we solve that problem. It's very hard to make a call if you don't know what the whole picture is, where the connections is going to be, where it's going to go from there. So it's very hard for me, but from the human aspect of upheaving lives and houses, that is definitely my preferred option, and it will solve a lot of the congestion problems.
This is the area where me personally, I've been canvassing for many years. In my opinion, this will actually solve a lot of the congestion problems. It will be the most cost effective, in my opinion, using the Mattersigadin Avenue, along with possibly the Tiawa Road that goes down to the water outfall, or somewhere between the water outfall and the Gaslight Theatre. Utilising an extension of Alpha Street will actually give people access from the northern end of a potential bridge to connect into downtown Cambridge. At the same time, the heavy traffic can go across, go to Cambridge Road, go to Peak Road, which is just a few hundred metres down the road, and go up that and that is part of the ring road. And heavy traffic can go to Hautapu and join the expressway at Hautapu and not have to go through town. This site, in my opinion, is the only site. It's greenfields, and it's the least disruptive as far as construction and impact on our town. And in my opinion, this is the only option.
Living in Cambridge for 56 years, they were talking about a third bridge in the 70s and 80s, and back then it was going to go where the RDA is and up Vogel Street. That was the edge of town way back then. Now that's too late now, and this one here, the Midwest, is the most obvious one. The roading's sort of already there, down the works and that. All you got to do is upgrade it, and it's the best and cheapest option, and it's obviously going to solve a lot of the problems, and I think it's the #1 priority place to put it.
Now we, 1, 2, 3, 4, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now we've got, the reason we've sort of come in, moved in this way is that we then look at the in-town pink area. The in-town pink area then has sort of more than one aspect to it, which is why it sort of ends up this way on the list, because it's easier to think about it this way. So in town, there's a few options. So there are options to essentially duplicate or widen the existing high-level bridge and or the low-level bridges. And there's an option of putting a new bridge not adjacent, not in the same corridor to one of those bridges. So that would obviously be further west of that high bridge. So each of those options are sort of bound up in the rest of the bullet points here. So it's kind of easiest, I think, when you think about those in-town options, to be able to comment on sort of pros and cons of each of those things around the high bridge, potentially around the low bridges, and a new bridge location within town as well, because they end up being sort of similar pros and cons, but then there are some specific aspects perhaps that might get called out for one or more of those things. So this will just go around up the last time and start with Andrew again.
I feel that the congestion problem is in town, so I'm great to see this labelled in town, because I think that's where the congestion is. I think that's where the solution needs to be, somewhere in that pink zone. That's identified in problem statement number 1. Also, number 1 is about environmental benefits. I think the shortest routes are the most direct, and having a bridge to shorten, keep trips through town short has environmental benefit. Problem statement number 2, an in-town bridge dramatically supports multimodal use compared to other options, which is critical for future reduction of private vehicle and reliance on private vehicles and congestion growth. Problem statement number 3, the limitations and resilience of current river crossings. I have grave fears about the high-level bridge, the state of the high-level bridge and its lifespan into the future. Also, the low-level bridge I've heard people talking about its age and ability to handle increased heavy vehicle traffic. In my opinion, having a bridge close-ish, if I can use that slang word, is a good management of the risk of our current assets. In terms of the location being alongside a current bridge or further apart, I think it depends on how growth continues in the future in Cambridge. Looking at the track record as to Stuart's point, I think probably further apart is better if growth continues on the path that it has tracked for the last 100 years. It's going to keep growing bigger and bigger, so having it a bit further away from the bridges will help address that.
Yeah, the in-town option, I think it all depends which one of those options you talk about. I mean, if you're talking about widening existing and using existing arterial routes, I think, there's obviously some advantages there, but there will still be some classic choke points. If you're starting to talk about those, plus a new bridge and sort of basically taking out a sort of like arterial routes either side, on the Leamington side and on the the Cambridge East side, I think you end up sort of creating lots of issues with regard to taking existing high density classic mid Cambridge, and certainly the last time when this option was brought up, a lot of people got very, very concerned about the sort of the cultural impact of what it will do to the old areas of Cambridge. So, if you go down this option, I think, you're going to deal with a very large number of particularly if you're taking properties through the Public Works Act, you're talking about a very large number of property owners that you've got to deal with. And I think you will still have this, but what about running a sort of arterial road through what is the sleepy village?
Okay, so in town, first point is I can't see a huge amount of benefit in upgrading either of the existing river crossing corridors because of where they attach into various points of our town. You're just going to have a bridge to congestion, basically. When they were built, the high-level bridge and then the low-level options, I'm sure made perfect sense at the time in history where they were, but it would no longer make sense to me to upgrade capacity in those corridors. However, I'm keeping a very open mind to a in-town crossing west of the existing high-level bridge corridor. There's quite a bit of real estate between there and the Midwest option, and so keeping an open mind, thinking about our problem statements and looking forward to what modelling data would show to sort of network flows if/when we start modelling corridors in there.
Yeah, I find this one I'm a bit unsure actually, to be honest. If the proposed private plan change 37 went ahead, this all of a sudden becomes a very plausible option looking at the right-hand side of this pink blob on the eastern side, because there's going to be an additional pressure on our traffic there. I think that there's a lot of benefits because we, have people wanting to go into town and do what they need to do. But yeah, there are also problems with property owners in this area. So probably a little bit more problematic than the Midwest option. Yeah, this is where I think it's a bit of unfortunate timing around this proposed plan change in this project. Yeah, I'm not really convinced on the in-town option, but could see some benefits. But I'm not an engineer, and I don't have enough data to probably make a full comment on this one.
Once again, don't have enough data. So if we keep the low-level bridge and upgrade that, and then my preferred option, the Midwest, I think less people will be affected, and that will solve the problem of plan change 37 as well. But then there's funding and everything else involved in that. So yes, it is an option, but not for a new bridge, but an upgraded low-level bridge on top of a new bridge.
This option, in my opinion, is not an option. We had a community backlash from this area previously. The reality is if you add to the existing bridges, you take the low-level bridge, for example, and that's all very well, but then you would need to then also improve the Karapira Road Bridge, which is extra costing. You don't actually solve any congestion issues, you just add to them. The high-level bridge is a heritage listed building. You cannot adjust any of that. And you also have a limit to how close you could build another existing bridge. And any option, I'm quite convinced up to the Midwest area is not going to solve any of the congestion problems, and adding congestion to congestion doesn't solve congestion. We need to get the traffic spread, not condensed. And to do that, you need to be looking away from this particular area.
Charlotte keeps mentioning about traffic going into town. And in the morning, 8 o'clock on to 9, and in the evening, 80% of that traffic going through town is going to bypass, the motorway bypass. Anyone wanting to shop in town, they'll go there, but the trouble is everyone's going over the high-level bridge to get to Hautapu to get on the motorway. The pink area here is a no-go for me. It's a lot. You're going to have heavy trucks going there 24/7 right through a residential area, and it's going to be quite noisy, and it's just not practical at all, and it's going to be the most expensive option to do anyway.
Just give me a moment. Sorry, just give me just.
Can I just make
Yep,
just
go for it.
while Katie's scrolling madly here, can I just throw in a 2-minute? I'm not trying to in any way have any effect on your meeting. My whole life professionally has been in transport. That's just a coincidence I'm sitting here with this hat on, different hat, right? So I think as a transport person, as well as Joe Citizen driving his car around town, or riding my bike for that matter, and I look at those trucks coming through the southern part of town, there are something like, on Pope Terrace, 330, this is current, maybe last year's figure, 330 trucks of more than 5 axles. The road rules for trucking is now that 8 and 9 axles is regular, right? Crawling. And you see them stop there at the roundabout by the High Bridge. You've heard about the deputation that went and sat at the council chambers a couple of weeks ago from the good people who live in Pope Terrace. And they were mainly growling about noise. I growl about a lot more than noise if I lived in Pope Terrace. And I live near to it, mark you. I think if you can think about in whichever way you want to put this whole thing, if you can get rid of a big lump of aggravating, slow moving, very costly to slow down and speed up again, by the way. The drivers hate it, absolutely hate it, right? If you can get that out of the equation by shifting it around outside the town somewhere, you are on a bonus, regardless of which of those colored things you want to use.
I actually agree totally with that. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, and we need to get the heavy traffic and the bulk of the through traffic away from downtown.
Katie, can you tell us about the Southern Links, or Mike, maybe that project's way ahead of this project in NZTA hierarchy, and that involved upgrading the Narrows Bridge to make sure as much heavy traffic, stays north and goes to State Highway 1 and chooses to travel north and south at the Tamaheri interchange. Is that being modelled, how that will affect heavy vehicles through Leamington?
So when we do the next phase of modelling, then one of the options that we absolutely will be modelling is the impact of having Southern Links, including, as you say, the bridge, Narrows Bridge upgraded. So having Southern Links and not having Southern Links to actually understand what difference it might make. And so I think that's, if I can just talk perhaps about next steps about bridges before we kind of move on from that, then absolutely. The idea is that we need to be able to model what those strategic networks are, not just the bridges, right? And so that, we of course. And so that's the way we would do that, is to model those strategic networks, like I say, including the impact. So there'll be a range of scenarios, and I guess the number of scenarios depends on how many areas are still on the table. And if they're all on the table, that's fine. If they're not, that's fine too. But even within each of these areas, there's still potential different locations to be able to test. But we will test against Southern Links, and we'll also test with and without an interchange at Te Rau Road, which is obviously something that's been advocated for a long time as well, and understand which ones might make sense. And and that's where the sort of combination you really need to be able to model. So Gerda, you referenced, well, if you upgraded the low-level bridge and then you had a Midwestern option, perhaps that's the best sort of combo. I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing that we'll be able to test through that strategic networks, and to put the idea of the sort of arterials and therefore freight routes and things like that, model that around the town as well, so that we really understand what those impacts would be. And that will really, if we can do that, looking at both the existing data and then the projections based on where we see the growth is likely to go based on where these growth cells are, then we understand what the sort of future need might be as well.
I think we've got elections coming up end of the year, government and that, and I think we need to put a lot more pressure on them to get northern ramps, because most of the traffic going through Cambridge is getting on the motorway And if they could go the low level bridge and up past the golf course, that would take a lot of them out of town and that. So I reckon we need to put more pressure on government to get northern ramps up past the golf course. That would solve a lot of the problems. And then the new bridge in the Midwest, I think the problems would be solved.
Eddie, are you keeping live in this next stage of work, how the high level bridge could be operated differently to how it currently is, like this idea of having tied in, tied out?
Absolutely.
Because it would make presumably quite significant difference to the modelling.
That's exactly right. So that's so thank you for pointing that out, because it's certainly on the list here. I mean, some of those communities' ideas, particularly for the high level bridge, although it perhaps applies a little bit to the low level bridge as well. But the idea of that tidal flow, so it might be northbound in the mornings and southbound in the evenings. Other particular suggestions, I'm using these by way of example, that you were but to think about how might you be able to use the existing infrastructure more efficiently, which is what you want to do, right? You want to make the most of what you've got. So at the moment, it's actually the roundabout at the end of the bridge that's the problem. So how might you be able to manage the roundabout in the morning? Some people have suggested perhaps there's a couple of no right turns. Yeah, so there's different ways of through traffic. I mean, there's all sorts of different suggestions that people have put forward. We don't need to decide on the fly if they're good or bad options. The point is there are a range of things that we can look at and model to see what difference might that make. And so you're absolutely right. Trying to think about ways of making the most of what we've got first before we build new infrastructure is really important, whether it's about a bridge, whether it's about a cycling path, whether it's about anything, anything else as well. Make the most of what we've got.
I find it really hard to make a decision on this because you don't have all the information. So you don't, there's a bridge going there, how's the interconnection? So will the next stage include that? Because
Absolutely.
I feel like we're running a bit blind here.
Oh, look, I agree. And certainly that you are not being asked to draw a line on a map and say, where should the bridge go? That is not where we're at in the stage of the project yet. We have some evidence which shows how people are currently moving, where are they moving around the sort of TomTom data over the past year. We know where the growth cells are likely to go, but being able to model that at a network level is absolutely what we need to do next. And you need to be able to see that information to be able to provide anything, any response to that. I think at this stage of the project, what we're asking is we have 3 problem statements. We have the investment objectives, so we know what we're trying to achieve. The question is, as we go through that funnel, are there any options at the moment that we think are not worth having further investigation? Because actually, as some of you have said, there are options that actually address those issues to a greater extent. And if that's the case, then we start down the funnel and we focus our attention on those. If the elected members on the 3rd of June feel that there's insufficient evidence for them to make that call and take any and park any of those things, then that's their call on the 3rd of June. And we continue to model and see where the evidence actually takes us once we've got stronger network modelling.
Statement with something that I would just throw into the discussion at this stage is that what we are looking at here is a potential site for a crossing, something that can be identified and protected. We are talking about planning for 30 to 50 years from now. We also can't have data on something that doesn't exist. We have data for the bridges we have and for the routes that we have at the moment, and we've got to try and mitigate those. To do that, I agree that we need to look at all the options to utilise the existing facilities that we have, but it's most imperative that we plan for a potential site for another crossing. It's not going to happen for many, many years And in the meantime, Cambridge keeps growing. And it's quite obvious to me that we're going to hit crisis point way before another crossing is made. And we have to look at all these options that we've got in front of us. But I think they're very limited, to be honest. That's my opinion.
Chris, what you're really talking about is designation. Reserving the land, put a fence around it, whatever you want to call it. And everybody's, all of the history, but sadly the history is history. And designation to me is vital, and as soon as sensibly possible.
When State Highway 1 was removed from town, I, was just actively interested. And I remember all the concern was for the loss of business in town at the time, lack of loss of traffic movements through town. I can't remember anybody suggesting it would be great for Cambridge's future in terms of the development it would bring at Hautapu. So I just want to talk, this unforeseen consequence, that the development of Hautapu industrial area is probably tenfold the value of the potential loss of commercial central business that has happened. So it's more, we can model and think what are the connotations of what we put the bridge. A lot comes down to, everything that the council throws around it to connect it to how we want it to be. We could potentially choose anywhere as long as the intent and the planning is done very well to do so.
All right, if that's that rounds out nicely, thank you very much. Yeah, I have been scribbling notes, and when we present the information to the elected members on the 3rd of June, what we will be doing is providing a summary of the workshop feedback for the elected members, the feedback from the community reference group, and they'll be endorsing that tomorrow evening, and then a summary of your responses as well, so elected members can see all of that alongside the evidence that they've got, that you've had as well. So if you're happy, we'll move on to parking management, and we should get kind of faster and faster as we get through the rest of the agenda. Parking management. So this is obviously another area which has been a hot topic for Cambridge, particularly for the town centre. But I'd remind you that over time, it won't just be the town centre where we have those potential conflict of uses. And so already we're starting to see interest around the Leamington commercial area. Andrew's just mentioned the increase in scale of Hautapu as an employment centre, and so that will continue to be of interest. We know that we've had people say that actually probably the biggest health and safety risk in the town is parking around the high school, and that was something that one of our community reference group members raised at the meeting last week. And there are other key locations over time where you can see that there's that sort of potential for parking, sort of conflict between different types of uses. So the idea for Cambridge Connections is that we put in place some parking objectives that apply across Cambridge, and that we can then adopt a parking hierarchy approach, which just says we will take this approach of sort of saying what are we trying to prioritize in each of those places, and so you'll see in the papers that there's the potential to think about that differently. If you're what you would prioritize around the high school, which is in a residential street, and you want to still be able to prioritize, residents being able to park, and that might be a different order that you would prioritize those things than in the town centre, for example. So what we're seeking feedback about today is the draft objectives, which are in your paper. There are 5 draft objectives, and then in the supporting material, then there's a description of kind of what each of them entails and why that objective would be useful. And I suggest that we can just take them as a group of 5 because they're very interrelated, obviously, and seek feedback from each of you on firstly having parking objectives so we can take a consistent approach, and then knowing that we'll roll that through as we work through with everybody about how that gets applied to different places, and then any feedback about the objectives themselves. And so perhaps we should start this time with Charlotte and roll around.
Yeah, I mean, they all make sense, the 5 objectives there. The one thing that I'm not sure whether it fits into 2, but I'm just going to put it out there. One of the key frustrations at the moment is with the development in residential areas of townhouses, what pressure that's actually putting on our streets, and it's just ugly. Like Thompson Street would be one example, like outside Lauriston Park, but then further down where the new townhouses have been built down to Cambridge Park, and you have to actually pause to allow traffic to come the other way. This seems to be something that we're going to probably deal with more and more. There's probably, I think it's emerging issue, to be honest. I'm not sure if it's really the intention of objective number 2, the right parking in the right places, but it needs to be captured somewhere. But in terms of the town centre, people will always ask for more parking. Again, like congestion, it's actually mainly at peak times of the day. Most of the time, I'm just going to say, I think people complain, but you can find a park and do what you need to do in Cambridge. It's not like, I spend every day in town, and I don't think this is one of the biggest issues facing our community, but that's probably unpopular opinion.
Can I just respond about the lack of parking and around townhouses? One of the requirements that the government has placed on growth areas, including Cambridge and Te Awamutu and Kihikihi as a Tier 1 centre under the National Policy Statement of Urban Development, is that we cannot require parking be provided. So it really is a developer choice about whether they're providing parking or not. And I know that makes it very, very unpopular for many people. But that is outside council's control, and I think that's something that we then need to think about. Well, what do we expect about the width of streets, for example, or other treatment that mean that people can still actually get down the streets and do what they need to do. But certainly, I think that is something that probably people aren't aware of, that's actually beyond council's control now.
I think that that's an interesting example of some of the things in this project, how they will have a knock-on impact. Does that mean if that's the case, do we need to move to one-way street systems? To be practical, I think that it needs to be captured somewhere.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, that sort of treatment of streets. So, yep, you're right. So parking objectives first, and then we can come back to the detail. So let's talk about feedback on the parking objectives, and then we'll talk about the specific hierarchy for the town centre of Cambridge.
Parking objectives like the whole Cambridge town centre. It's a wide statement.
I agree with the objectives. How we actually achieve them, because there are some of them that are really lacking. And at this point, I can make some suggestions, but I do agree with the 5 objectives.
Over the last 5-6 years, we've taken out quite a lot of car parks for other alternative reasons. There is a lot of parking. There could be more parking done down Taylor Street, there by the school and the soccer grounds and rugby grounds there. I've been watching for many years, and it used to be just a bog hole in the winter, but they have made it done halfway along or a third along, and there could be a lot more there. But as far as finding parking in town, I don't know what the answer is for that.
In number one, it's got support a vibrant Cambridge town centre. I just hope that Leamington is included in that, or it should specifically state maybe Cambridge and Leamington. Number three says encourage travel choices that reduce parking demand. To Stuart's point, that nearly feels like we're accepting that we could reduce parks or people are going to park less if we manage it well. I would like the statements to be clear that as the population of the town grows and until we have other mode choices, parking numbers should be increased and definitely zero removals.
I think the parking objectives, as stated here, are very sound. Further on, when we talk about sort of what we do with parking, living close to town, there are a lot of people who are driving into town and parking all day, and that is then causing lots of problems, particularly around the medical centre, where people, particularly elderly people, will go there and they literally can't find a car park because somebody has taken it for the whole day. So I think we do have to, part of sort of a vibrant community town centre and therefore more limited parking. And as we go, as sort of the town gets more and more potential people who are employees, this is a growing town and you can't just sort of drive into town and park outside. It'd be lovely to have, but I've come from Auckland where, ultimately, they've taken P20s and P60s all the way out through to sort of Epsom, which means that sort of people just can't drive into town and even catch a bus in. So, I think, but it has to be done in association with the public transport option. And as you start reducing parking, you've got to have public transport options to replace it.
Yeah, very happy to see parking being part of Cambridge Connections, because it is part of your consideration of how the network works. And I take Pip's point as you sort of look forward in time, it will change. Parking demand. So we sort of got to always be mindful of that. You can imagine scenarios in which it changes quite a lot if everyone's got self-driving cars just dropping off and picking up, that sort of thing. But it seems to me that your parking is an integral part of this. Very easy to agree with these parking objectives, and probably as you get down into the hierarchy, that's where it gets a little bit more meaty.
Yeah, that's right. So that's where we'll move next, is actually then, what we've got is a parking hierarchy approach, and then we've applied that to the Cambridge town centre. And the reason for starting there is that that's where the biggest concerns have been and where we have the supporting evidence. In the pack that you've got a position paper from the Chamber of Commerce in support of the overall need to manage parking. And then you've got a draft parking hierarchy for the town centre that's also supported by the Chamber of Commerce. Kelly Buzade's not free to attend tonight, but she knows that that statement was about to be made on her behalf. And I gather she's probably spoken to Charlotte about this as well. And certainly, and this has been something discussed by the community reference group as well. The idea of having of taking a parking hierarchy and applying it first to the Cambridge town centre is then something that in the next stage we'll then look at doing, for these other key locations. You mentioned Leamington, etc., etc. way that you apply that and roll it out is that, again, with the link that we've provided, is that you're always trying to stay slightly ahead of when is the next change needed. And so what you are needing to do is make sure that you've really got a good evidence base to see when are you getting this sort of sufficient turnover. The national guidance talks about having an 85% occupancy rate, and that's part of the national parking guidelines that I've included the link to in the paper. And so when you get to that sort of 85%, then you can kind of think, okay, so people can still find a park, but we're getting close to this point where it's actually going to become a problem. What's the next step we need to do? What's the next step? What's the next step? And that trigger means you've got an objective trigger to take that next step to actually manage demand. And that can then be either introducing a parking time restriction, shortening a time restriction, as you say, as people go out. It might be it might be introducing pricing down the track. That's certainly not something you'll see. That's not something we're expecting to do immediately. But you've got these triggers all the time to be able to keep managing demand. But the first one would be in accordance with the parking hierarchy here, to really solidify making sure that we're addressing the problem that actually, Pip, you've already raised, and that's something that the Chamber of Commerce and others have been talking about for a long time, about the town centre, and that is the workers and long stay parkers parking in town, right in the middle of town, and then other shoppers not being able to access parks. So the proposed parking hierarchy for Cambridge town centre then puts in place those time limits for those key streets and then the peripheral streets. So you still are providing then key parking areas for your workers and for those long stay parks who want to come in and then take it further out that way. So perhaps just open it up to general feedback rather than needing to go around the room for that.
I would just endorse what the Chamber has provided in terms of feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of go back to my Auckland comments. I mean, I've got an apartment in on Newmarket, and sort of 2 or 3 years ago, they then put P60s on the street, right? Which means that sort of, people can, because people used to sort of drive into Parnell and sort of Newmarket, park there for the day and then sort of, take a cheap bus. And then, what's happening increasingly as you keep on going further and further out, they're sort of making it impossible so there's a sort of combination of carrots and sticks. And I think we've ultimately got to go down this similar pathway. I mean, the carrot is going to be some public transport, which means that people can take a bus into town. The stick is that, sorry, you can't park outside the Victoria Square because sort of all day, because guess what? We're going to keep that for the vibrant town centre. So it's just, yeah, I mean, we can't have it all. And if you're going to work in town, maybe people will actually start taking buses into Cambridge town.
But certainly, just to picking up on that point, I mean, the hierarchy is really explicit to the points that you've already made. Those things have got to go hand in hand. There have to be alternatives if you are going to make it harder for people to be able to park in town. You cannot take those options away unless you've actually got the alternatives provided.
Yeah, I just think it needs to be stronger, to my point. I feel like if you look at examples of other places, Pip mentions Auckland, Newmarket, the Westfield Newmarket Mall are pumps. And why? Because people can park there. Sylvia Park, it's just massive. The base, Te Rapa, what's the answer? Parking. Taumutu Main Street, Hamilton Main Street, what's the problem? I think people have got options where they can park and get to the shops easier. Hautapu, it's cranking. Why? It's ease of access. People can get around. I think we need to be supporting building more parking in our CBD before something else comes along and takes the business away. I don't know. I just think there's more examples of that all around in New Zealand, and I think we need to take note of that.
I was just thinking about it now. I think there could be quite a lot of parking made down by Te Kuri Lake, not in the lake, but where the trees and rubbish and it is behind vehicle surfaces and that. There's quite a lot of land there, and I think you could make quite a big car park down there.
I'm with Andrew on this. If people are for convenience, so if you make it hard to park in town or make it too restrictive, the easy option, and people are already doing it, you wait for Saturday, you get in your car and you go to Te Awa, and then the shop local will just disappear, and the shops are already struggling, they will just close down.
Yeah.
One of the things that needs to be considered, in my opinion, is to allow commercial parking buildings. Let business take care of itself. And because there's a limit of space in Cambridge, and as everybody has suggested, if you can't park close by to where you want to go, they're not going to go there. And if we are able to have like a parking building that is a commercially supplied, it's no expense to the council, but it helps the whole town. It's just a consideration, and I think it should be part of the game.
Do I ask a question of Chris? Are you talking about a PPP type development for car park?
Just a private car park.
Public-private participation.
Correct.
Has anyone done a pricing for a tiered parking building and that? Has anyone looked at pricing for that? What sort of money we're up for to do that? Like in Hamilton and stuff?
Yes, that has, but I don't know off the top of my head what it is. Yeah.
I heard a $6 million figure pulled out at one stage. Like 6 million, I don't know. Yeah, I just probably, but the point, I think to your point, it just couldn't come on as a burden on ratepayers. Yeah. And
Yeah, and look, I take your point, and I think that this is exactly why you start with your objectives and say, actually, maintaining a thriving town centre, or what vibrant town centre, whatever the wording was, is really important to keep in mind. As you say, you don't want to make it so hard that people go somewhere else, and that's exactly been, part of the feedback from the chamber as well, obviously. And so the idea of making sure that you're continually monitoring this kind of occupancy means that you can adjust as need be, so that you can make sure that there are sufficient parks around.
Also to take into account that not everyone working in town actually has a static job.
Yep.
So I need my car all day, every day. So do tradies, so do everyone else. So there should be that should be accommodated as well.
Yep.
Is the word number one, support a vibrant Cambridge town centre? Is support a strong enough word, perhaps? The adjective could be, I haven't got any on the top of my head, but it's more than promote. It's do or die for Cambridge. Cambridge's character, it's a lovely village. If that is in our heart, we need to, there's no other option. We've got to make it happen. And so this hierarchy has got to run from that first statement, and the wording, I think, could be stronger.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's useful feedback. Thank you very much. And obviously, we'll be putting that together, again, feeding it back. Moving through to the next one here, walking, cycling and micromobility. This is an area where there was a business case done back in 2021, approved in 2022, which set out the idea of having a cycling network hierarchy. So just as you would for roads, when you talk about having arterials and collectors and minor roads. And so it does mean that you then have, as it shows in the paper, the opportunity to make sure that you think about where might your spine roads be for cyclists, and give them a level of treatment for those spine routes that is greater than you do for those where you're mixing more between pedestrians and cyclists. Where are you then sharing on the roads? Where are you doing those sorts of things? So the paper sets out that cycling network hierarchy. The business case also identified where work was going to start happening, and again in the paper it just talks a little bit about what work has been done in the past few years, where they started on the Hamilton Road, on Cambridge Road, and so on, and what it asks for you based on the information again in the appendices that you've got, is where might you see your immediate priorities for additional walking, cycling and micromobility initiatives that we would then be able to take forward for consideration. Those would be the first ones into the long-term plan. The paper sets out where the feedback from elected members and the community reference group perhaps would focus their efforts first, but keen to seek your views on where that would go. Again, perhaps just whip around the table. It doesn't matter who we start with.
For me, it's I've, like I said, been in Cambridge for a very long time. I found Cambridge one of the best. There's plenty of walking spaces there and plenty of cycling before we even spent all the money on cycling. I think we should be concentrating more on car traffic rather than cycling. I think we spend far too much on cycling tracks and lanes. And personally, that's a sore point for me. So I'll end it there.
Cycling and walking certainly have their place, and particularly for the future. But one of the things that I have been told, and I understand, is that even if you doubled or had 100% cycling and walking, you're only going to reduce the traffic, the vehicle traffic, by about 10% to 12%. Cycling and walking also, with the implementation of some of the cycling tracks and stuff like that, what we have done is compromised routes for general traffic. And as a result, we've ended up with congestion where maybe we wouldn't as much at all. So we need to review exactly what we are looking at for walking and cycling. They do have their uses and they do have their means, but we've got to balance it.
I agree with Chris on that. In my view, there's plenty of cycling ways, plenty of walkways. We have to also take into account that we live in New Zealand, but the weather is not always the best for walking and cycling. Speaking to parents, and because I said to them, why don't you get your kids, old person, cycle and walk to school? And they said, the kids get bullied at school, we have to drop them off. So that's another option, another problem that we're struggling with. But compromising roadways to make cycleways adds to congestion and a whole level of different problems that you have. So as far as I'm concerned, enough cycling and walking ways, maybe a bit more connection between Cambridge and Leamington, or safer ways, but apart from that, not much.
I have a bit of a different opinion. I only live about 1.5 kilometres from town, which would be a reasonable amount of time for my children to cycle to school. But from where we live, the pathway is actually very unsafe and very narrow, and there is a major, state highway almost coming down beside them. So that's a real concern for me, and so I don't allow my children, who are only young at the moment, to cycle down that area on their own. If it were wider, 100%, I would do that. So I actually think on the Leamington side, there's actually some improvements we could make to our pathways to make them wider and more accessible for everyone. The other consideration is that the data shows our population is aging, and we're going to have more people not able to drive, and we'll be relying on things like mobility scooters to get from A to B, and to have their independence. So we need to account for that as well. And then, looking further down on the Shakespeare side, it's a large residential area. There's going to be potentially, again, connection to a major growth area. That connectivity is really important. So I think there's definitely some work that we could do on the Leamington side, to make cycling, going on a mobility scooter, on a e-scooter, a lot easier for people, and there would be less reliance on vehicles. So we don't have to put in the the gold-plated cycleways that we have down on Hamilton Road, but to enable it to be safer for our people, I 100% support that.
Comment on that. So are you happy to compromise on roadways for that and then add to the congestion, or what? How do you or should there be a balance?
Like with everything, there needs to be a balance, but I think that some of our pathways definitely do need to be widened. I'm not asking for a huge investment to be put into that, but I would like to see that as part of our plan. I actually think it's actually a short-term issue that we need to deal with because of our population changing quite fast.
Right, so I think the walking, cycling, micro mobility network's really important feature of the whole system. Okay, I know it's caused community angst and controversy what's been built recently, but I actually think that we'll look back in a few decades and be really pleased that we did build that, because we built the hardest bit first, and and whenever you're doing infrastructure, you always look back and you wish you could have done something years ago. It's like, when was the best time to plant a tree 50 years ago? When's the next best time today? It's the same with sort of this infrastructure stuff. So I think we will look back and be very pleased with the start on the network we've built, okay? Because it is an important component of this. I think it needs to continue to be an important part of it. I do think Leamington has kind of been left out a little bit at this stage. I thought this urban mobility business case is still really valid. It's a few years old now, but you read it and it's still very, like I say, the hardest bit's been built. So the connection through to Leamington is sort of the obvious missing bit. But I think we take lessons from what we've done to date. And things like taking up car parking spaces for cycleways and stuff. We don't have to do that. So the urban mobility case, for example, shows cycleway going along Shakespeare Street, and it doesn't need to. It could go somewhere else to achieve the sort of network aims, while at the same time protecting the vibrant Leamington centre, etc. So I think it's still, in summary, it's still an important part of the network. Needs to be part of the plan, and it'll pay dividends as we go. Leamington, for me, is sort of the obvious bit that needs to be kind of next.
It's interesting when sort of initially all those cycleways were being built down Bryce Street and Alpha Street, etc., there were sort of people yelling and screaming, saying, "Oh, it's never going to work, it's never going to work." I strolled down there at 8:30 and I looked up and down sort of Bryce Street and I watched kids, you know, cycling to school and just happy as a clam. And I just support Mike, you know. I mean, ultimately, you know, people are using them, you know, young, old, middle-aged, etc. But we have to also think that, you know, we're going to have people on scooters, etc. So sort of, you know, we shouldn't think of cycleways as being cycleways. I mean, I think they are, you know, multi-use facilities with sort of, and it's interesting, what stage is a bike with an extra battery on it sort of going to become sort of almost the sort of 50 or to 50 cc of 50 years ago, where people are literally going around town on a bicycle, but guess what? It's sort of it's a small car on, you know, with a battery pack. The other thing I think this is really when the cycleways and the arterial routes and the roadways that we're going to think about for bridge locations are such that, you know, we have to make sure that there's only a certain amount of, you know, pathways available. You know, for example, right now Bryce Street is the cycleway has come up past the school and sort of down Bryce Street and Alpha Street. That in the inner town location is obviously going to be a classic arterial route. And so do you then, if you're going to sort of say, is Bryce Street going to be an arterial route for a new bridge? Or is it going to remain as a cycleway? Because you can't have Fonterra, you know, 9-axle trucks going down next to the cycleway. So if we, you know, you got to decide if you are going to allocate that as a cycleway, therefore it has to be taken away as a potential arterial route.
Look, I kind of agree with Monty. You know, I'm a massive supporter of promoting walking and cycling, even as a motor vehicle user. Pretty much 99.9% of my day. I think it can be as quick or quicker. It's healthier. It's cheaper for council and for users. I think if you stick with your vehicles, more congestion will be your compromise if you have no mode shift. So that there's kind of, if you do nothing, there is a negative as well that you have to think about. I agree with the comments that taking up vehicle streets shouldn't be done. I think there's plenty of excess streets. Every busy vehicles pathway in Cambridge and Leamington has a parallel quiet street, which could be used for bikes, for example. So I don't see any compromise required. The Greenbelt is a fantastic walking path and potential bike route as well.
I'd just like to make a comment at this stage, is that it's been said that Leamington is missing out on some of the cycleway connections particularly. The council a few years ago built a utility bridge by the Gaslight Theatre, and they missed a wonderful opportunity to put a cycle lane across that. I asked a couple of times why that wasn't considered. The first time it was answered by saying it was going to cost too much. I asked the same question of the same person 6 months later, and they said, oh, well, they were having trouble with the landowner on the Leamington side of the river. My answer to that would be, as soon as you come off the bridge, you do a U-turn and go back under the bridge, use the Queen's chain, and come out at the dog training park. Pretty cost effective. And to put a cycleway across that bridge even today, I can't see for the life of me that you wouldn't be able to do something properly for under $200,000.
I remember back in council days, for the 2021-31 long-term plan, a business case was put together by the transportation team for that particular crossing. So that information sits there. There's obviously some data wrapped around it, and it's something that could be revisited as part of this process.
I've made a note of that, and perhaps just the only thing I'll add is that one thing I didn't specify is that when the modeling's done around the strategic networks, that looks at all modes. It isn't just about vehicles, and so to your point, that sort of thinking about what's the role and function of that. It's called a corridor, is what you need to decide first. And then you can figure out, well, if this is the main function for it, then how much is footpath, how much is cycleway, how much is for vehicles, how much, what are you trying to actually achieve? And so then you can avoid this kind of conflict, like you say, between heavy vehicles and cyclists or something like that, sort of trying to shove them down the same route and trying to treat them, treat that as a main route for both of those purposes. And we do have some of that sort of internal conflict going on at the moment. I think that that's the advantage of being able to think about it as a network. So role and function first, and then sort of mode and treatment as a result. Yeah, cool. All right. Finally, public transport. So I've deliberately put this one last on the list because this is a little bit different, because actually it's Waikato Regional Council that's responsible for thinking about and providing public transport services. And the information that you've got there talks a little bit about what exists now, and what is work that the Regional Council's been doing at the moment. So the Waikato Regional Council's been considering options for upgrading the services for Cambridge. And what's set out in the paper is they've been doing work they started with sort of 8 or 9 options and shortlisted to 4. Those are the 4 that are identified in the paper. They've then done more technical work to move from the 4 shortlist to their preferred option. That work is just concluding, and we are sort of waiting to see the results of that technical report. We will be able to, have a different type of influence around public transport. So what we will be able to do once we know what that option is to think about how strongly we support it and how much support we think that it actually addresses the problems that have been identified in those investment objectives by the community. So there's 2 things that we've heard. No, there's 3 things actually that we've heard from the community with the feedback, and in no particular order. That's that there is a call for around town services for people to be able to use public transport. Then there was another group of feedback to say that there were areas of Cambridge that are not currently serviced by public transport, and particularly the newer developments. Yeah, that's right. And this way, that would like that public service, and particularly then that connection through to Hamilton was something that and improvements to that connection to Hamilton was the sort of third group of bits of feedback that we got. So those are the things that are being considered, and you can see why the short list of options sort of considers sort of how might it be able to address those problems. So certainly the Regional Council has taken on board the community statements of what they would like. When we know what that preferred option is, then it will go through a decision-making process through the Waikato Regional Transport Committee. We have, that's made up of political representatives from each of the councils around the region, including Waipa. And so obviously we have a Waipa for advocacy voice through there, as well as thinking about that work that the Regional Council's looking at. Well, what would that step be? They're looking at a 10-year time frame. Within Cambridge Connections, we also need to think, so what is it beyond 10 years that we might think about? How might you keep building out beyond the immediate next step? And similarly, what's the supporting infrastructure and other activity that we might want in place to actually make sure that we make the most of the regional council services. So the split for public transport is that Waikato Regional Council provides the service, but the district council has a lot of involvement about exactly what is the route and where might the stops be, so that it actually fits in. And it's the district council that then provides the local infrastructure like a bus shelter and seats and lighting and live timetables and those sorts of things to support the service itself. And so we have the opportunity to think about, again, what's the role of public transport that it might play, and then and therefore what initiatives might we want to put in place to support those priorities. And I think the information that we've tried to provide you here is both about sort of current use, both for those who are using it to go to the high school and to and on to Hamilton. And also then about what currently exists around the total mobility scheme, which does exist for those who for those who have the gold card users who are then able to move around town as well. And at the moment that that's a service that actually has currently low level of use, which surprised me when I looked at the numbers, given the amount of feedback that we had about people wanting to be able to move around town to destinations. So I'm interested in your feedback about, like I say, without sort of being able to jump in and choose one of these options, because that's a Waikato Regional Council choice, about where you're seeing the key hotspots, and what role you might think public transport can play. So I'm looking at page 6 of the report that that is circulated. I am 7 of the diligent pack. Thank you. Okay, that's not very helpful then, is it?
Yes.
I understood. Oh, okay. Well, perhaps you don't. Perhaps what you do just have is just the text that's in the report, which shows which lists what those 4 shortlist options are, rather than sorry, that's my mistake, and it's because I've got tangled between what's come to the CRG, the community reference group, what's gone to a workshop, what's gone here, what's gone there. What I had assumed that I'd also provided was just a map of the current Route 20 around Hamilton, and a bit of patronage figures for the current PT service and the increase over time, which is what information that we provided to the community reference group. But there's no further information. There's no further information about the regional council sort of technical work at the moment.
You happy for me to talk away? You happy for me to?
Yeah, of course.
So we, at the reference group, had a visit from an officer of the transport side of the regional council, and then basically kicked around some ideas, and a number of options came out, and if this comes out ragged, forgive me, they might not be in the right order of preference, Currently, we have route number 20 that takes us into Hamilton. I ride it quite frequently, by the way, and I've learned how to swap buses in Hamilton, and it is so easy and it's almost seamless. But Route 20, which starts by Cambridge Park, jumps around Leamington over the bridge, straight through town and out. So the great northern part of the north side of town, it does not have a service of any sort. That's the first thing. So can you use the current number 20 to give some form of service, greater service to both sides? And yes, there is an option. And the option that we discussed last week was to double the number of buses coming out of Hamilton. We'll call routes A and B. So the buses come out as A, B, A, B, A, B. So A will never won't cross the river, but do a skirt around the northern part, which will probably, it doesn't matter what the routes are, it will start to serve some areas that aren't served, and ditto on the Leamington side. So the thing is, if you're in the northern part of Cambridge or the southern part of Leamington, the number of buses you will get each day is what you have now. And they're not full, so it's going to cover the people. That's one option. The second one is to leave the number 20 alone, just do what it does now, and to start thinking about some form of small buses, how they're financed, let's not worry for a second, and should they be going around town in a way that interfaces with what we'll call the line haul to Hamilton. Thirdly, should the number 20 bus be extended once a day, the 20 and the 26, by the way, I think it's 26 or TA, so they do the whole loop. Hamilton, TA, Cambridge in, and vice versa, because there's a lot of people want to come along across between the two towns as well. And then the other option is, should smaller cars, taxis, Ubers, dare I say, be operating in the town, and all this mix is there, and nobody yet has made any finite prioritization of what they could possibly be. Have we got that right?
Absolutely. So that will work its way through the process in the next couple of months, I would expect. Yeah. Right. That's yep. That's right. That's right. So since then there's been additional services added to same route, and they've added in the link to the high school and for the morning service. Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know whether this is right or wrong. To me, it seems that the wonderful new bus we got, which was a double-decker, electric bus, and when I see it, it's always got two people in it. And I know we can't undo that decision, but to me, we sort of started with this huge double-decker battery-powered bus that seems way too big, and a bit like putting an A380 on an Auckland-Sydney service, and you go, maybe we could have started with a lot more smaller vehicles to give greater flexibility. Where are we at in terms of because to me, we've got the wrong equipment trying to serve the wrong problem, where if we'd started with smaller equipment with greater flexibility, we'd be probably better off.
Yeah, well, without having the detailed, I don't have the patronage data in front of me, so but I'll summarize. Certainly, the patronage data and when the regional council person came and spoke, what they commented on was that the double-decker bus obviously is particularly for commuting between Hamilton and Cambridge. It means that in the mornings, it's really full, particularly when it goes to the high school. By the time it gets to Hamilton, it's completely full. And for those fans, so Phil Mackay, the other co-chair of the Community Reference Group, who's a regular bus user, says that actually and I know that it's the same after school, that it's absolutely chock-a-block and that kids are having to wait to catch the second bus home after school from that double-decker bus there and at the end of the day. So I think, again, this is about the sort of peak use, then it's actually getting used well. In the middle of the day, then there's not nearly so much use. And it's the same amount there around the number of people who are actually currently using it to get, say, from Leamington just into town and back. Those numbers are very low. But I think it's, from the regional council's point of view, it's actually doing its job extremely well as a commuter bus for the high school kids who are, and there are a number of them who are going to high school in Hamilton, and the same for commuters.
I did have one request from the Te Ao Mutu Community Board that we raise the potential idea of having and it would probably be at peak times, a bus between Cambridge and Te Ao Mutu, particularly for people who work like in one town or the other, just to create better connectivity.
So going back on that sort of comment, if you're saying that the sort of the main trunk line is being serviced really well, to me the logical conclusion is that you then have almost a feeder service going. You've got sort of like a feeder service going into the main trunk line, which is the Cambridge Hamilton and maybe the inter community groups, as opposed to the collecting community to a central point.
And I think the key point that I took from your comment was also about the fact that we can step our way as growth occurs and as patronage increases, so that you can make sure that that's sort of fit for purpose over time.
Just in the work we got from the regional council were comparisons with a lot of other towns. Not all in New Zealand, incidentally, but same sort of size town, age groups, whatever, and to see how they have solved their problems. And we're not here, in my opinion, to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of good examples out there of how you can possibly do it. Cambridge is not unique, although sometimes we like to think it is, of course, but it isn't when it comes to transport terms.
I think that, what we should be looking at is using the big buses for, like Cambridge, Te Ao Mutu, Hamilton connection. But we need to utilise smaller coaches, even large vans if it comes to that, or just around the Cambridge to make it a drop-off points so that a wider area of Cambridge is actually served by coach. And, I don't think it's impossible. And if it's done correctly, it could serve all of Leamington and all of Cambridge, including St Kilda, at a sensible price.
All right, look, thank you very much for that feedback. That's the sort of the last piece of the puzzle that we're looking at specifically. In the report, there's just a bit of a reminder in terms of background information about some of the drivers for change, which I don't need to go through now. But I think the point that I was just going to make about that is that increasingly, you saw how much information's come in your appendices this time round, and that's only going to grow as we get a whole load of this evidence. So we are remodeling the website, which has already got a little bit overwhelmed with how much information is on it. So we are remodeling that at the moment so that we can really make sure that all of the evidence gets really built up there, so that all the community can see and have really easy access to the supporting information, as well as understanding what the methodology is that we're actually applying. So I hope that what does mean that each time you'll end up seeing a whole load of links, so that rather than having 300 pages of appendices, because otherwise it really is going to get that ridiculous for you all. So we're sort of quite conscious of that, and working very hard, like I say, to make sure that all that information is really available in the public realm as easily as it can be, so that everyone can actually sort of dig into that to the extent that they want to. But with that, perhaps I'll just thank you and close out today. Your feedback will be rounded out, and like I say, we'll head back and inform the feedback that we provide to the elected members, and inform decisions that we ask them to make on the 3rd of June. I will be not here at the next meeting, but there will be someone else from the project team who'll be able to come and present to you and make sure that you get an update at your next meeting. But thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Peter.